In the tragedy of Julius Caesar, the two characters, Cassius and Casca, hold a very brief conversation about the speech that Cicero gave during a festival where Julius Caesar was offered a crown. And one important detail that was brought up about the speech was that Casca couldn't understand anything about the speech that was given there despite being in attendance because, well, Cicero delivered it in Greek. And as a result of that, we actually get the coinage of the now frequently used English idiom, "It was Greek to me." Although the phrase itself has definitely divulged from its initial literal meaning into something that is much more metaphorical to explain something that is just simply beyond our grasp, the phrase hamartia is quite literally Greek to every single one of you, save those of you who actually know how to speak Greek. Now, the phrase hamartia in Greek roughly translates into English as missing the mark, or more precisely, sin. I broach this because the profundity of that nuance that the word hamartia carries has distinctly affected Christian theology and thus philosophies that have been influenced by Christianity as a result of that. That whenever one sins, it's simply missing the mark, that they're straying from the path that God had laid out for that person. And more particularly the Catholic and the Orthodox branches of the Church. Although I myself am a religious person, the point of this video is not to try and evangelize you or convince anybody here watching to come and join my faith, but rather it's an exploration of this concept of missing the mark and how that theological concept permeated its way into Christian existentialism, in particular the branch of existentialism that Dostoyevsky explored in Crime and Punishment. However, before we actually get into Dostoevsky a little bit, I feel like we are obligated actually to explore Søren Kierkegaard's perspectives before looking into how Kierkegaard actually influenced Dostoevsky. Now, one notable detail to include about Søren Kierkegaard is that at the time you can consider him as being this negative counterpart to the dominant German philosophy at the time in Europe, being that of Hegel. Now, according to Hegel, one could actually tap into total absolute truth through science and logic. Now, Kierkegaard saw this and said, well, by that extension, if you can find absolute truth, then you can actually tap into the mind of God himself. Because after all, God knows everything. He is omniscient, right? Kierkegaard didn't like this. He actually called it a scala paradisi, or in other words, this hubristic Tower of Babel that people could use to climb to heaven without ever having to be Christianized. And that was Kierkegaard's whole emphasis, was how to be a Christian in a changing world, because at the time Denmark had just recently moved out of feudalism and into the capitalistic world. Therefore, he turned this entire notion of being able to access absolute knowledge as being an obstacle to the advancement of human ethics and morality. So instead of turning God into this perfectly understandable qualitative object that people can all understand, he decided to use this inverted dialect that Christianity uses in its theology, stating that, well, once to reiterate, knowledge itself is an obstacle, and that no human being can actually say who God is 100% beyond a reasonable doubt. So our experiences as Christians is not only a battle against the world and seeking something that is otherworldly and higher than ourselves, but it is also completely and totally individualized, and so that the existential experiences of every single person is dependent upon the decisions that we make in relationship with how we act towards God and His plans for us. In other words, it is our own hubris that is preventing us from going forward. It is the fact that we continuously miss the mark on our actions that prevent us becoming moral and ethical beings. We're sinners. That's that. With this in mind, we can actually move over to Dostoevsky's perspective on things and how he actually executes this within Crime and Punishment. Now, before I get into the meat of Dostoevsky's perceptions of existentialism, I do want to clarify something about the book and what I will be talking about more particular with the book. Namely because, one, I haven't finished it, but secondly, it's a lot easier to pick out a particular series of events that happened and just look at those and generalize it as a whole, because the same thing kind of happens from what I have read so far. Now, the scene in particular, or scenes in particular, that I will be discussing is the build-up and aftermath of Raskolnikov's decision to go on ahead and to kill his little landlady with an axe, right? So, sorry, spoilers, should have checked at the beginning of the video. But anyway, Dostoevsky. In continuation to Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky also rejects this idea of being able to approach some sort of absolute truth, because he believed that it wasn't necessarily because it was terrible or it was immoral or anything of that degree, but that total absolute rationalism in attempting to mark oneself as a moral authority on the basis and grounds of an idea or an ideology actually makes a person inauthentic to themselves. So what you get as a consequence of this concept of the struggle of authenticity to oneself and living authentically to oneself, you get a struggle, and that struggle is largely psychological within his main characters. Now, often this struggle can be manifested as a conflict of interest, of passion and rationality, and that's what happens in Crime and Punishment. You have a passion, which is actually just a facade for something that is morally incorrect, versus an authentic, good person buried somewhere in the psyche of Raskolnikov somewhere. Within the case of this book, I believe that it is best summarized within a very pithy statement: when reason fails, the devil helps. To contextualize, up until the point where Raskolnikov is deliberating about killing Mrs. Ivanova, the landlady, he is racked with indecision about whether or not this particular course of action is the one that he truly wants to take. He has moments and times where he constantly fantasizes it and meticulously plans out what specifically he wants to do, down to the slightest detail. And then, after realizing that, oh my god, I'm thinking about killing someone, he slides immediately into repentance, and it's just bipolar, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, slowly convincing himself to go on ahead and actually give Mrs. Ivanova the axe. Now, for poor Raskolnikov here, the murder did not exactly go as planned. What ended up happening is that on top of having to kill Mrs. Ivanova, he wound up also killing Lizaveta as well, and then he ended up robbing the place to try and frame it as a robbery, and then there's all of this evidence that gets strewn behind, and he has to go and hide all that jewelry later, and then he has to literally bury the axe, for crying out loud. And this indecision that you would have thought would have gone away after committing the act plagues him still. He's obsessing over the event like crazy, and it's not because specifically he's neurotic, that's one reason why, but more specifically, he's trying to figure out if he acted authentically or not to himself. And it drives him sick, and it drives him insane, and it drives him to the point of suicide, almost. And that's the whole point of this concept, is that when you have a event in your life that you are trying to discern whether or not you should go on ahead and act on it, and then you go ahead and do it, it's a natural consequence to feel this anxiety about whether or not you're actually acting authentically to yourself. And that's a cornerstone of Dostoyevsky's ideology. And that's why he writes his characters as neurotically as Raskolnikov, or as the underground man as well, if you want to go into some of his other works. So what we actually get in Crime and Punishment, or if you want to look at Notes from Underground, if you've read that book either, or you want to look into that one as well, Dostoevsky uses these anxieties, this neuroticism that absolutely plagues his main characters to insane degrees. Not because it's just some sort of quirky little trait that will drag the plot along or keep the reader's eyes glued to the page as to what he's going to do next. It's more really an allegory of our decisions that we make in life as a whole. Dostoevsky uses this one event to hold up and make an example of the consequences of not actually acting to our authentic selves and allowing ourselves to fall prey to missing the mark, to fall prey to sin, to just simply fall short. However, it is from this gritty conflict that we move and operate through from the day-to-day that we can learn to become better people by continually fighting against the things that prevent us from being inauthentic to ourselves. Thank you everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It wasn't really terribly in-depth, but it was just a fun little exploration, I suppose, of this book that I'm reading right now, and I enjoyed making this, and I enjoy making content for you guys, and I try to as frequently as I can. Please like, subscribe, share down below. Let me know what you thought. I can continue this, do a little bit more of a deep exploration or a deeper dive into things if you guys would like to in the future if I can. And once again, I guess just thank you for watching, and tune in for more content soon. Bye-bye.